From Act One. Goodman.
Wait a minute now. You keep your distance, all of you. So I've got a car that starts by itself. Well, that's a freak thing, I admit it. But does that make me some kind of a criminal or something? I don't know why the car works. It just does.
This stops the crowd momentarily, and now Goodman, still backing away, goes toward his front porch. He goes up the steps and then stops to stand, facing the mob. We see a long shot of Steve as he comes through the crowd. Steve, quietly.
We're all on a monster kick, Les. Seems that the general impression holds that maybe one family isn't what we think they are. Monsters from outer space or something. Different than us. Fifth columnists from the vast beyond.
He chuckles.
You know anybody that might fit that description around here on Maple Street?
Goodman.
What is this? A gag or something? This a practical joke or something?
We see a close-up of the porch light as it suddenly goes out. There's a murmur from the group. Goodman.
Now I suppose that's supposed to incriminate me. The light goes on and off. That really does it, doesn't it?
He looks around the faces of the people.
I just don't understand this.
He wets his lips, looking from face to face.
Look, you all know me. We've lived here 5 years, right in this house. We're no different from any of the rest of you. We're no different at all. Really, this whole thing is just weird.
Woman.
Well, if that's the case, Les Goodman, explain why—
She stops suddenly, clamping her mouth shut. Goodman, softly.
Explain what?
Steve, interjecting.
Look, let's forget this.
Charlie, overlapping him.
Go ahead. Let her talk. What about it? Explain what?
Woman, a little reluctantly.
Well, sometimes I go to bed late at night. A couple of times I'd come out on the porch, and I'd see Mr. Goodman here in the wee hours of the morning, standing out in front of his house, looking up at the sky.
She looks around the circle of faces.
That's right, looking up at the sky, as if he were waiting for something.
A pause.
As if he were looking for something.
There's a murmur of reaction from the crowd again. We cut suddenly to a group shot. As Goodman starts toward them, they back away frightened. Goodman.
You know, really, this is for laughs. You know what I'm guilty of?
He laughs.
I'm guilty of insomnia. Now what's the penalty for insomnia?
At this point the laugh, the humor, leaves his voice.
Did you hear what I said? I said it was insomnia.
A pause as he looks around, then shouts.
I said it was insomnia. You fools. You scared, frightened rabbits, you. You're sick people, do you know that? You're sick people, all of you. And you don't even know what you're starting, because let me tell you, this thing you're starting, that should frighten you. As God is my witness, you're letting something begin here. It's a nightmare.
From Act Two. Charlie's voice, shrill from across the street.
You best watch who you're seen with, Steve. Until we get this all straightened out, you ain't exactly above suspicion yourself.
Steve, whirling around toward him.
Or you, Charlie. Or any of us, it seems. From age 8 on up.
Woman.
What I'd like to know is, what are we going to do? Just stand around here all night?
Charlie.
There's nothing else we can do.
He turns back, looking toward Steve and Goodman again.
One of them'll tip their hand. They got to.
Steve, raising his voice.
There's something you can do, Charlie. You could go home and keep your mouth shut. You could quit strutting around like a self-appointed hanging judge and just climb into bed and forget it.
Charlie.
You sound real anxious to have that happen, Steve. I think we better keep our eye on you, too.
Don, as if he were taking the bit in his teeth, takes a hesitant step to the front.
I think everything might as well come out now.
He turns toward Steve.
Your wife's done plenty of talking, Steve, about how odd you are.
Charlie, picking this up, his eyes widening.
Go ahead. Tell us what she said.
We see a long shot of Steve as he walks toward them from across the street.
Steve, go ahead. What's my wife said? Let's get it all out. Let's pick out every idiosyncrasy of every man, woman, and child on the street, and then we might as well set up some kind of kangaroo court. How about a firing squad at dawn, Charlie, so we can get rid of all the suspects, narrow them down, make it easier for you?
Don. There's no need getting so upset, Steve. It's just that, well, Myra's talked about how there's been plenty of nights you spent hours down in your basement, working on some kind of radio or something. Well, none of us have ever seen that radio.
By this time, Steve has reached the group. He stands there defiantly close to them. Charlie.
Go ahead, Steve. What kind of radio set you working on? I never seen it. Neither has anyone else. Who you talk to on that radio set? And who talks to you?
Steve.
I'm surprised at you, Charlie. How come you're so dense all of a sudden?
A pause.
Who do I talk to? I talk to monsters from outer space. I talk to three-headed green men who fly over here in what look like meteors.
Steve's wife steps down from the porch, bites her lip, calls out. Mrs. Brand.
Steve! Steve, please!
Then, looking around frightened, she walks toward the group.
It's just a ham radio set, that's all. I bought him a book on it myself. It's just a ham radio set. A lot of people have 'em. I can show it to you. It's right down in the basement.
Steve whirls around toward her.
Show them nothing. If they want to look inside our house, let them get a search warrant.
Charlie.
Look, buddy, you can't afford to.
Steve, interrupting.
Charlie, don't tell me what I can't afford. And stop telling me who's dangerous and who isn't, and who's safe and who's a menace.
He turns to the group and shouts.
And you're with him, too, all of you. You're standing here, all set to crucify, all set to find a scapegoat, all desperate to point some kind of finger at a neighbor. Well, now look, friends, the only thing that's going to happen is that we'll eat each other up alive.
He stops abruptly as Charlie suddenly grabs his arm. Charlie, in a hushed voice.
That's not the only thing that can happen to us.
Cut to a long shot looking down the street. A figure has suddenly materialized in the gloom, and in the silence we can hear the clickety-clack of slow, measured footsteps on concrete as the figure walks slowly toward them. One of the women lets out a stifled cry. The young mother grabs her boy, as do a couple of others. Tommy, shouting, frightened.
It's the monster! It's the monster!
Another woman lets out a wail, and the people fall back in a group, staring toward the darkness and the approaching figure. We see a medium group shot of the people as they stand in the shadows watching. Don Martin joins them, carrying a shotgun. He holds it up. Don.
We may need this.
Steve.
A shotgun?
He pulls it out of Don's hand.
Good Lord! Will anybody think a thought around here? Will you people wise up? What good would a shotgun do against—
Now Charlie pulls the gun from Steve's hand.
Charlie. No more talk, Steve. You're going to talk us into a grave. You'd let whatever's out there walk right over us, wouldn't you? Well, some of us want.
He swings the gun around to point it toward the sidewalk. The dark figure continues to walk toward them. The group stands there, fearful, apprehensive, mothers clutching children, men standing in front of wives. Charlie slowly raises the gun. As the figure gets closer and closer, he suddenly pulls the trigger. The sound of it explodes in the stillness. There is a long angle shot, looking down the figure, who suddenly lets out a small cry, stumbles forward onto his knees, and then falls forward on his face. Don, Charlie, and Steve race forward over to him. Steve is there first and turns the man over. Now the crowd gathers around them. Steve slowly looks up.
It's Pete Van Horn.
Don, in a hushed voice.
Pete Van Horn. He was just going to go over to the next block to see if the power was on.
Woman.
You killed him, Charlie. You shot him dead.
Charlie looks around the circle of faces, his eyes frightened, his face contorted.
But, I didn't know who he was. I certainly didn't know who he was. He comes walking out of the darkness. How am I supposed to know who he was?
He grabs Steve.
Steve, you know why I shot. How was I supposed to know he wasn't a monster or something?
He grabs Don now.
We're all scared of the same thing. I was just trying to protect my home, that's all. Look, all of you. That's all I was trying to do.
He looks down wildly at the body.
I didn't know it was somebody we knew. I didn't know.
There's a sudden hush, and then an intake of breath. We see a medium shot of the living room window of Charlie's house. The window is not lit, but suddenly the house lights come on behind it. Woman, in a very hushed voice.
Charlie, the lights just went on in your house. Why did the lights just go on?
Don.
What about it, Charlie? How come you're the only one with lights now?
Goodman.
That's what I'd like to know.